we're back to the whiskey. I can't believe how long this bottle of whiskey has lasted, but I'm not sure it's going to last much longer. Holly, is the ball? Hello.
Hello.
Oh my goodness, you are so on the ball. You're like you're on time, you're early. I love
That's because I had to kick my family out.
it.
Really, go away.
Yeah,
Please.
I was just saying, I've managed to work on the same bottle of whiskey the entire time I've been doing this interview series, and it's
Wow.
down to like that much.
What
But
is it?
it's Oban 14. It's just like a
Oh,
really nice, super peaty whiskey. We're gonna give a few minutes for everyone to come because I set up this. I'm learning how to use the internet, Holly. I feel like, and I set up this count, like this alarm, and it notifies everybody at 3 o'clock sharp.
no,
So
I don't understand how to use anything. I swear the last 2 weeks, I think I learned how to use Instagram
yeah,
so much better than I had before, which was very badly. So
I love it. Also, though, your hair looks amazing.
thank you. I really am
Oh, of
liking
course.
it. Look, so it looks like it's the same color, but it's really not
It's like,
because I dyed a lot of it.
yeah.
But I feel like I'm getting this like witch streak
Oh,
where
it's
part of it's
amazing.
dark and part of it's light.
It's great. It's like the
And
kind
that's
of
what I
streak
really,
most people really fight for. That's like
yeah,
a
like I'm excited
$500
about
streak.
that. So once it actually grows out, because you can see it stops where
Hmm.
my fake gray begins.
I love it. I love it. How are
Excited
you
about it.
doing today?
I feel like it's my time to have really long
Yeah.
gray
Are
witch
you
hair.
growing it out?
Well, I might as well, right? Because if you bleach your hair all the time, it's
Yeah.
not going, like, it's a no-go situation. It's just
Yeah.
going to break off. But if I don't, I might as well, right? Because you're going to have gray hair. You might as well
True.
have creepy, long gray hair.
True, you want it to be like very witch energy. Like
Yeah.
big, big witch energy.
That or I'm going to get bored and shave both sides.
That's kind of where I would be.
Yeah.
I'm in like lockdown hair right now, which is,
Yeah. No, this
normally
is
my hair is
all.
like this long and I have bangs, and the bangs have grown out so badly that they're pinned way back here.
Yeah, yeah. I have a mullet, some kind of mullet situation happening.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thanks for having me.
This
I'm
is
really
this
excited.
whole chat series is really just an excuse for me to pick all of my author friends' brains about how they work. Like, what are brains and why are all of them different?
Well, that is my favorite thing to talk about is process. So I'm really, really
Well,
excited. And also, I
yeah.
think we're all getting a little lonely and
Yes.
weird. So.
Well, I did this chat with Neil Gaiman last night, and I was explaining in the green room beforehand that, like, whenever anyone comes to my place in Edinburgh, which no, it doesn't happen anymore, but historically, they would have to leave a bottle of whiskey. And we were talking about drinking, and he was like, "Yeah, you've got to drink with company, though, or else it gets kind of sad." And I was like, "That's why I do this interview series, though, so I get to drink alone and I have company." So it's perfect. Yeah, it is. It's nice to connect, especially, with BookCon and all of these things that we'd normally see each other in person.
Right.
Also, I think the coolest part of this virtual element is, as you'll see from the chats coming up, is it allows it to be so much more global. I mean, we get people
Right.
that tune in all across the world for these every week, which I think is just wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I didn't realize until we were locked down. And like, I think I did, I can't, I'm like, which was it? It was Y'all West. I did,
Yeah.
a juvenilia panel. It was the only thing I did. But um, you know, I didn't have any sense of like how people would want to come to panels or when they're
Yeah.
virtual. 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Watching. And I thought I've never been on a panel with 1,000.
Right?
That's not a thing, but
But
it's
across the
true.
world.
Yeah,
And
like
it's
people
wonderful. I
didn't.
know you have a huge international fandom, and so it's such a gift to the international fans who are anyone who's geographically restricted. I mean, there's a huge amount of privilege in any kind of geographic
Yeah,
event. So
yeah. I mean, anywhere because even when it's a relatively local event, I never had a writer that I loved come to the town I was in until I moved to Philadelphia for college, and Anne Rice came
Oh.
through Philadelphia.
Oh, I don't know if you noticed. I think one of the first times an author that I was a fan of came to where I was, Kelly Link taught a workshop at my college. Like I was a college student and Kelly Link came and taught a fiction workshop. Amazing. And I was like, it was life-changing for me. I didn't realize that you could just meet authors in this way, that you could be people. Well, look, and one of the reasons I'm like over the moon excited to talk to you because you are brilliant and extraordinary, but anybody who knows you knows you're also kind of a fictional code breaker. You're like this incredible problem-solving world builder. I mean, authors come to you. Like authors come to you for this.
The only reason I have techniques to fix stuff is that, first of all, I've never written a single thing and written it right first. I always write it wrong. I always write it wrong first.
How wrong?
And so,
like, are you talking about redo wrong?
Yeah, like sometimes, yes, complete redo wrong, plots wrong, everything, like line by line, everything is wrong. And for whatever reason, my brain can only fix stuff. It can't make stuff. And so I have to make broken stuff and then fix it. And so, like, it is only that I've made every mistake it is possible for a writer to make.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of like a Dr. Frankenstein then, right? Like you learn by putting the thing back together after you've killed it, though.
It's true. So when people talk about something being broken, I'm like, nothing is broken. That's how everything is. Everything is bad until it's good.
Well, but I do think this is so important because so many people tune into this. They're not only fans, but they're writers, because this is kind of the whole point of this interview series, this idea that there's no right way to write. And I think this is so important, though, is perhaps you might feel like the first version of the thing you make is more broken than is usual, but it's impossible to write something right the first time.
Right. It really is.
It's a lot.
I mean, I know people who write very close to, like, who write at a point where you can see the final draft. Like you can read their draft and you can see the final draft. And there are people who do a lot of behind the scenes work. They do a lot of going through it in their minds. And I don't know how, you know, you will tell us how you do this, but like you were talking about Kelly.
Yeah.
And Kelly is a person who like figures it out in her mind. And she does do a lot of rewriting, but like she also does a lot of figuring it out.
Whereas, screw those people, because I do a huge amount of planning and organizing and prep work, and I still have to rewrite it all. Yeah, I am not that smart, apparently.
We do figuring it out on the page.
I put in so much time to figure it out before the page, and it doesn't matter. I end up just like having to rewrite it all from scratch anyway. But this is great, because I feel like a lot of people might not know this about you, that you have this in-industry reputation of like almost like pulling napkins and placemats over in public and being able to break down people's books and fix them just instantly, like a beautiful mind.
If you want a great if you want, like, here is the technique.
Yes.
I'll tell you the technique. It's a very simple technique.
Do it.
You get someone to tell you their book.
Yes.
You listen to what they say. Eventually they ask you a question that they already answered in their description of their book. You tell them the thing they said, and they're like, that's so smart. And you're like, no, you said it. And they're like, no. Like, no, you said it.
You're a book therapist. You're a book therapist, because a good
I like a book therapist. That is
not
what I am.
Just tell you. Well, I think we get so close to our work that we miss, like, we're so close that we can't see what's right here.
And I can't do it for me.
Yeah.
My book is totally broken. I can't do it anyhow.
Well, I'm just going to call you up
and be
like, let me tell you my book so that you can tell me all the ways that it's broken. So what you do is you ask the perfect questions that like turn the Rubik's Cube colors for
if you stay on the phone long enough, you can ask the perfect question. Again, like, endurance is a big part.
I love it. Well, look, we're gonna dive in. I think first of all, the first question I like to start with, I want to hear your origin story. Like, you're such a name, you're such a presence. You are. I like feel like every time we talk about this, you're like, what? And I'm like, do you not know yourself? Like, do you not know
I am aging all the time. So.
No, but you've been in this game for quite a while, and you're kind of like one of the royalties, I feel like, of the crown is on. And so can you just kind of give me selfishly and everyone who's tuning in kind of just like an abbreviated origin story of like, how did you get from zero to like Spiderwick?
So I was a kid growing up in New Jersey, down the shore. I always loved fantasy, loved Dungeons and Dragons, like,
Yeah.
uh, and, I always liked to write. And I think, one of the big things that I think really helped me was back then there was some arts funding.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anybody who had a career in the arts at all. Like,
Yeah.
And I feel like that it made a big difference that if you like wrote a lot, there was like one day a year when you could go to a college and there were classes.
Really?
Yeah, and and all you had to do is like you had to write a story good enough to get picked for your school. And I think like people don't realize how much those arts funding things make a difference to kids. Like I grew up with, I don't know, like a lot of bad kids. I know a lot of bad kids, a bunch of people I used to hang out with wound up going to prison. Like I also knew a lot of good kids, like, but I think like it makes such a huge difference to have this possibility put in front of people. Like I remember thinking, I hate high school. Maybe I should just drop out.
Yeah.
And I think a huge part of why I wanted to go to college was because I thought there's going to be writers there. I can hang out with writers. And
it's a doorway out.
What?
It's a doorway out.
It's a doorway out.
Your way
and
out.
Like, I think if I hadn't seen that, if I hadn't gone to those programs, we also had like one of those like weird gifted and talented programs. And that's when I wrote my first book, was in that, like when you get pulled out of class, and I wrote my first terrible book.
I was going to say, like, your first book is not your first published book.
No, it's an amazing book that I read from in all my juvenilia panels called The Knights of the Silver Sun, by which I believe I met Moon. And it's a pastiche of all of the things I loved at the time, which was Lord of the Rings and Interview with the Vampire. So it was a bunch of vampires who were being held captive by an evil dragon named Ventramax, and these group of adventurers who had to like
this is gold.
Go find them.
This is like it's gold. This is gold.
And it's like maybe a little tad of flea in there. I definitely used the line, they came to this place of men and whores.
But I love this because most people's first work is in some ways a pastiche of their favorite fictions, right? Like we are fanficking, we are assimilating in the process of finding our own voice. Mm-hmm. So you had this gifted program.
Right. So I did that, and then I like sort of slurped my way to college, and then I got a job in medical publishing, and I was a production editor on the Journal of Pain and the Journal of Hand Surgery. And I just, kept trying to write my book. Yeah. I was working on I was working for free on a gaming magazine. And that's how I met Tony DiDelizio, who I would go on to do Spiderwick with. And I finished my first book, which was Tithe. And
which have beautiful new covers. The new covers for those
I'm super excited about them.
Stunning.
I knew I know Tony's editor from knowing him. And he read my book. He read my book, and at the time I didn't think it was a YA book. I thought it was an adult book because, if you're writing about a fairy changeling, like you don't want the person to be too old when they figured it out, or you think they're like not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So like, she was 16. I read a lot of adult books with 16-year-olds, and but he, I had a librarian friend who gave me a copy of Tammy Pierce, a Tammy Pierce book, and a Garth Nix book. And they said, you don't know what YA is right now. Go read these. And I thought, well, whatever this is, sure, I want to be part of that.
That's some good fictional heritage there. Like Ray Bradbury had this opening in one of his short story collections where he essentially laid out his fictional heritage where he was like, this author is my mother, this author is my father, these are my aunts and uncles. And I think about things in terms of the ingredients in the creative pot that make us our creative influences. So I love hearing those formative, the ones that guide you. Well, and I think it's really interesting. Some people come into YA and they're like, this is the only place I've ever wanted to be. Like, I'm still in my teen self. And then some of us just kind of wander in off the street. We're like, well, what are we doing? Like, the Near Witch, I wrote it and I made her 16 because I didn't have a good reason. I was writing a fairy tale and it seemed like a good age to make her. And it wasn't until after the Near Witch was written that they were like, this is a YA novel. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's kind of been my continuing philosophy since then is like, I care far less about the section of the store than getting it to whatever readers want it. And I think it's like, someone described it to me as like puzzles, like books have a lower age limit, but no upper age limit. So really you're just saying like, this might not appeal as much to like under a certain age, but there's no sense of you don't graduate out of it. Something, I really love, I was thinking back on all of your books, and actually I'm going to harken back to something else that Neil said last night, because it kind of rocked my world, we were talking about how, and I do feel like this way about your books, how you don't tend to write the same thing twice. Like you have a huge, like a very big, like you've got vampires, which is like my favorite, you've got curse workers, which, and for any writers following us, like, and the books that I always point out as an exercise in stellar world building and magical systems are the Curse Workers books. Then you've got Darkest Part of the Forest, and you have obviously Carden and the Curl Prince books, and you've got all these different things. And something Neil said last night was that there are dolphins and there are otters, right? And the dolphin author is this idea that like when you give a dolphin a piece of fish for doing a trick, it does the trick again. And when you give an otter a piece of fish, it's like, great. And then it goes and it does something else. That's why you can't train otters. But I'm curious, is it something, is it come from I know right now I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm an otter. Like they're just ornery and you can't train them.
Right, like what I appreciate about that is that I think sometimes people think of like not writing the same thing as like better. But what I like about that is he's like, no.
Just like, they're just really impossible to train. But is it something that you would do? Do you intentionally sit down to like be an otter, or does it just like, is it come from a place of your own interest in the story and wanting to follow new threads? Where is it?
Yeah, I think, by the time I was working on Curse Workers and Doll Bones, which were my, I wrote the Modern Fairy Tales, and I'd also done Spiderwick. And by that point, it had been almost a decade of writing in fairy. And so I thought, I want to do some other stuff. I want to do some stuff that I also love. And I don't know if that was like the wisest. Like I have also a bad tendency to like make a move and then be like, well, this appears to be a move that only a fool would make, but here I am.
I'm a strong believer in those moves.
Like, how about writing a vampire book when no one wants them anymore?
But I have to tell you, Coldest Girl in Cold Town is perhaps my favorite. Like, I don't even know. It's just so fucking good. It
was such a love letter to the 90s and like the vampire books I loved in the 90s.
I love it. I
love doing it, but like when you talk about like the thing is I actually really love talking about people's careers and like thinking about what are good strategic moves. It's like I'll lay it all out and then be like,
just won't do it. I know, I'm the same way. Like, I always think, I'm like, man, I really should have just, like, kept going with that thing that was clearly working. Right? But in the back of my mind, I'm like, you know what if I wrote a book, like Addie LaRue, my book coming out this fall, exact opposite of anything I have ever written. I'm like, look, I'm gonna write, like, a weird love story about abuse and immortality, and, like, it's gonna be completely different from everything that everyone has said they like of my books. Like the things they like about my books, I'm just gonna throw it out. Like I'm just gonna throw it out. And then I was like, I had a moment where I was like, this is probably a really terrible idea. And then I was like, but it excites me. And we like writing is so lonely, and we live with our stories for so long before anybody else gets them, that if we get bored, I mean, we're screwed.
And I mean, I do think you wind up following the thing you want to do, and hopefully, I think to me the biggest surprise as a weird kid who loved weird stuff and who was often out of step with
Mm-hmm.
the people around me, was that a lot of times the stuff I like, people also like.
Yes.
Real surprise.
Yeah. But this is the new nose. I discovered this, I guess, 4 books in, because I discovered this with Vicious, where I definitely went from trying to guess what other people wanted to read to realizing I had no control over the industry and no control over what
Right.
success was going to be. So I was going to write my weirdest, truest self, which was apparently supervillains. And I thought, nobody will like this, but at least I will. And what happened was, the more I wrote that, the more people liked it, because it turned out whatever it was in me that it was speaking to, it spoke to other people. And my success, one of the only through lines I can make, is my success is always hugged along the line of me being truest to my creative self and worrying less.
Mean, when I started the Curl Prince, I thought, well, here's a super weird thing. I don't know if I could even pull this off. Like, I mean,
you did.
It's, you know,
yeah.
Hopefully people will go along with it. You know, they were excited by Darkest Part of the Forest because, you know, I had some fairy readers who were excited. Mm-hmm. So I guess they will maybe enjoy that. I don't know. Like, it really had that quality of like, but you know, when something goes well, you think, oh yeah, foregone conclusion. But I remember at the time thinking like,
oh yeah. And so I feel like if there's anyone out there listening and you're having that you're at that fork in the road where you're like, do I go towards what I'm guessing other people want, or do I go into the dark of the forest where I have no idea if anyone will follow, but I'm excited? I always say go on with your own excitement, because that's also the thing that's going to sustain you, right?
I mean, I remember writing Curse Workers and being like, this feels so commercial. It wasn't. And then later, do you know Robin Monsterman? She was like,
not personally, but I obviously know of.
Yeah, you had to know that wasn't commercial. I was like, I didn't. It seemed like a good...
Every time I've tried to write something literary, it has become commercial. And every time I've tried to write something commercial, it has veered so wildly off course that everyone's like, what do you think commercial is? Or what do you think? And I was like, apparently I don't know. I just need to write what I'm going to write. Like, I just thought that Savage Song, which is a book about violence breeding actual monsters, was going to become like the most, like, too commercial. And it got into the most dark existential territory where Harper was like, you said you were going to write something commercial. And I was like, yeah, it's like, there's no romance. It's just violence, like gore and existential crises on every page. And they were like, do you know what commercial is? But I enjoyed it. Oh, thank you. But I think I love that when authors that I love and I follow their careers, and I love when I see those authors also following their passions, because the thing about otters is you have to embrace that your readers will probably not feel equally about all of your books. And some people will love X, and some people will love Y, and some people will love Z. And sometimes they will apologize to you for not loving X, Y, and Z all the same. But like, the beauty of that is that you will find people with each of your books for whom that book is just exactly what they needed, rather than trying to cater to the whole audience.
And then they'll be annoyed by the other books you did.
Exactly. Exactly. But like, so your books are so diverse in the narrative, but something that I notice among them all is like, you do have this incredible I don't want to call it just an attraction to the supernatural. You sit up alongside the supernatural at all times. You write your worlds either on top of the mundane world or right next to it. And it's my favorite kind of fantasy, is one that occurs in our environment, right? A fantasy wherein you're not, like, Lord of the Rings is great, but you can never go there. The only way you can get there is by reading. But when you read a book that is set through a doorway or a curtain or one step off from our world, there's a sense almost like a chance, like you might find the way in. And I'm just wondering, is it something, were you always drawn to stories where you were only one footstep away from fantasy? Is that something that you seek out, or is it just how your brain works?
I think I was a big high fantasy reader as a kid. And actually, I think in some ways it was probably somewhat reading some of the like fairy urban fantasy, you know, your border town stuff. And but I think it was a lot reading Sandman, actually, that changed my brain. I was like very, very high fantasy, no horror.
Yeah.
And I'm like very easily frightened. Let me put it that way. And so not a horror, like, no, I don't watch horror movies. I still don't watch horror movies. I'm terrified of zombies, like really terrified of zombies. And when I started reading Sandman, I was so freaked out, but I was really pulled in, and it showed me how much I could love horror, and sort of was my gateway to horror, but also my gateway to, you know, you have your own life and then you have what you read. And it was the first time where I felt like I could put my life into the stuff I was writing.
Yeah.
You know, here's a path to talk about your own life, but also talk about the stuff you love and bring those together. And I don't think that before that, I really had permission to do that.
Well, and that's so interesting too, is that I never really thought about that as a genre, of all of the genres outside of realism, horror is the one that hugs closest. Horror is the one that usually doesn't depart our world. It's ghosted on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah. That's fascinating to me. That's wonderful.
I remember being on a panel, and I wish I remember who said this, because ever after, like, it has stuck with me. And and you know, it is the thing that, like, the departure for me from horror is, they were talking about how in horror the supernatural is wrong. It is an abhorrence. It is the thing you must root out. Yeah. And that in fantasy, no matter how dark or grim or whatever, fantasy still is imbued with this sense of, or the supernatural is imbued with this sense of awe and wonder. So even if it's like about to eat you, you're sort of glad that the world is big enough to have it, you know, in there. Yeah. And that is the line for me.
That's such a good point too, that it's not the monster.
I wish I remember who made it.
It's so good too, because, like, you're absolutely right. It's something to repel against, something to excise instead of something to embrace. Now, as I said, you're this fictional code breaker. You're obviously amazing at what you do, but I want to know, do you have a kryptonite? What part of the process do you feel like you fetch up against and you're just like, God damn it?
What? I have no idea what happened. Okay. I start, and I'm very curious how, so I know a bunch, so I had this Celeste retreat I was on. I made people tell me what they start with. And there are these people out there who start with the ending.
That's me.
And they,
I know.
No, they're the people who know the through line.
Yeah.
Like, they're the people who actually can figure out the story. It's fascinating because I don't even know how y'all get there. Like, what?
Well, so it's not the thing I start with, but it's the thing I won't let myself start writing the book without. So, like, because it's like, it's the thing that takes it from a desert to a field. It's the thing that you're excited about reaching. It's also the reason you won't quit, because you just know, I just have to get from here to there.
Sure. So the thing I start with a lot of times is a feeling.
Okay.
Feeling.
Like
maybe a picture in my mind. What?
Like a color palette? Like an atmosphere?
No, like an emotional feeling. And sometimes with a picture that gives me an emotional feeling, but it's all in my mind. And then I try to find the story that gives me the feeling of the picture in my mind.
What? Wait. This is ridiculous. Okay, wait.
This is a bad way to write.
Give me an example here. So, like, pick one of your books and help me understand what its seed was then.
Okay. When I first wrote Tide, I wrote the line, the iron cuffs were softly burning on her wrists.
Okay.
I didn't know what it meant. And then I had to make a whole book to go around it.
Oh my God. So you truly are just like,
that line gave me. No, it's terrible. This is not a good way. This is a terrible way to write.
Is it always that way?
Well, with Darkest Part of the Forest, I like the idea of it was always the coffin, the glass coffin in the woods, and the idea of kids partying around it.
Okay, so you start with a moment, though.
It's a moment. That was a moment.
Okay, that's less ridiculous.
But it gave me a feeling.
Okay. So, but here's a question. Follow-up question, because I love this, because I don't understand it, but I'm trying.
It's terrible.
Follow-up question. you do when you get that moment, do you just
Mm-hmm.
like automatically dive in?
I used to. I don't now.
Yeah.
I try to. Well, mostly I don't. With Darkest Part of the Forest, I admit I did. I wrote the whole first chapter and then tried to figure out what could happen, extrapolating on what I wrote. A lot of times, what I used to do was try to write a perfect chapter and then extrapolate upon it to get
Okay.
to the next. This is, no, look, it's a
Terrible. I love
terrible way to write. Now I try to make a plan and then I write that. But there's a point at which obviously I feel like emotionally it is like, you know how like if you like your arm is at a joint, like you can
Mm-hmm.
tell it's wrong,
Yeah.
but you don't
Yeah.
know why, but it's aesthetically wrong, it's emotionally wrong, and you have to find the events or
Yeah.
description that make it emotionally right.
This is so complicated, Holly.
It's terrible. I don't want to be this person.
I feel like I have you seen the new Jumanjis? The new Jumanji movies? Okay.
I've not. I heard they were good.
They're actually the first one's very good. But like it starts with them just like they take on their avatar and then the avatar is just like dropped into the center of the world.
Right,
Like
right.
where am I and how did I get here and how do I get out? And I feel like that's what you're telling me. It's like you're just like, here I am.
That was I think my journey as a writer
Uh-huh.
to become less the person I was is the journey of being able to pull back further out of that character's head. You're right. Like to get more and more and more distance. And a lot of times I talk through the story with friends because just when you use a different part of your mind, like talking is a different part of your mind. And
well, as you know, when you talk it out, you can see the truth.
Right. Like you get more distance and you can sort of try to, I think you can move to other things. Like a lot of times when you're building a magic system, one of the great things about it is that you can tweak it to make it aesthetically right. And the more aesthetically right, the more it's going to generate the aesthetically right story.
I love it. So I understand the starting point. Like A Darker Shade of Magic started with a girl, an injured young man in a red coat walking through a wall and colliding with a girl dressed as a boy. Like that was the moment. But like there was like a year and a half between the moment and me figuring out what story and plot and everything that it went.
Okay. Here's what I want to know. What happened during that year and a half?
I didn't have a story. So like I got the idea.
How did you get one?
Okay. Because I'm like a cook. Everyone who listens to any of these interviews knows I have like a zillion metaphors. I'm sorry. So, but like, you know, the worst question authors ever get asked is like, where do your ideas come from? But that question is heinous in the generalized sense and wonderful in the specific sense because all of my books are essentially a collection of ingredients. Right, and that moment, that snapshot of Kel walking through the wall and colliding with Lila is an ingredient. Mm-hmm. But it was only one ingredient. It wasn't a meal. So I put it aside. And then about 6 months later, I was thinking about how I wanted to write about multiple worlds, about like a multiverse kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I wanted to write kind of like an Avatar style elemental magic. And so I came back to that moment where he walks through the wall and collides with her. And I thought, well, what if he wasn't just walking through the wall? What if he was walking through the world? And that mm-hmm. was like, the ingredients came together into a meal, but I still didn't start until I knew how it ended. Because the reason for me ending is in part because I don't want to quit. And if I have something to work to, it excites me. But also, this is where it gets kind of trippy. The only way for me to figure out who my characters are is to figure out who they become. And then I rewind them. So I figured out who I wanted all of my characters to be at the end of the book, personality-wise, growth-wise, and then I rewound them to figure out what ill-formed version they're at when we meet them.
That's fascinating.
Like
so you instead of thinking how the plot goes, you think how the people go.
Exactly. I think like I know who Lila is at the end of the book, and I know like down to the shot what she looks like, what's happening. So what version of her do we meet at the beginning? What is she lacking that she gains by the end? Like, so it's like a weird trip.
I feel like what I do is I write my characters and then I see what they did and then I analyze who they must be based on what they did.
I love this. It's just people think understand everything about what we're writing, but really we're just like discovering it as we go.
And the thing is, that's not the person I want to be. I want to be a person who has like a really rigid outline and like, you know, I don't believe in, I don't believe characters talk to me. Like, I don't, you know.
Neither do I.
I don't want any of this mystical business.
I have very little mystic. I am very much like the god of my own world. There are one or two mystic moments. One is the names. I can't plan them, but I will go through maybe 500 until I find the right one.
Agreed.
And then I just know.
Yes.
And I can't write them until I have their name because I can't change the name.
That is true for me too, and it's so weird.
It's such a weird, superstitious moment. And every now and then, I think the only other mystic moment I have is, you know, when you like didn't consciously plan something, but you hit the moment in the plot where you realize it has been subconsciously aligned the entire way. And you're just like, I'm either brilliant or very lucky. Those are my
favorites. And yeah, when stuff starts to like actually, and I think that's why for me, the beginnings are take a long time, and there are a lot of stuff. And then the decisions start to, like, as you go towards the end, things start to accelerate because there just aren't many decisions left. And you get to tick off all that stuff.
Yeah. I'd say I probably spend about 3 to 5 times as much time on the first 100 pages as I do on the rest of the book.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also, I think, if you're writing anything fantastical, if you're not writing realism, you're also trying to mitigate world building along with plot. And like by the end of that first act, you're really trying to make sure that your core rules are there so that you can break them in the second and third acts without them feeling convenient. Like it can't come in the third act because then it's just convenience. It's just hand of God reaching in and being like, here's a doorway that didn't exist. I think this is amazing. I love this. I can't imagine what your brain must be like, and I think it's wonderful. This is just a journey that we have been on together, a journey. So I'm still trying to, so you have a moment, and you get from a moment to basically exploring your surrounding and your characters.
Right. Like I go from the feeling to the characters, and a lot of times some kind of conceptual piece of business. Like what is the like what are we working with here, right? Like werewolves. Like here's a character, here's a feeling, werewolves. And then like
ingredients.
Right, like what, because I think, you know, one of the things fantasy does is sort of demand you to pick a universe or a sphere of fantasy, whether it's something you're going to generate or something, you know, that comes with its own folklore. And so once you sort of pick a genre of fantasy or a direction in fantasy, like that gives you some stuff.
How are you meeting these characters? Are these characters just like poof? Like where does Carden come from? Is this just like, here I am? Yeah,
they're kind of like that unless they're not.
Yeah.
And if they're not, then and I feel like for me, first books or standalones are the process of figuring out who those people are. So I have some of them from the jump. Like, you know what I mean? Something about them, like the thing where you're like, I know their name. Sometimes I don't know that much about them, but if it's the right name, something
it tells you a lot.
Right, and then there's details that accrue.
Yeah.
But throughout the whole first book, I'm willing to change a lot of details about people. I'm willing to change who they are, the backstories.
You can change plot. You're just not changing the essence of the person, right? You can change the circumstance, and then the circumstance starts informing them. Are you telling me you change their personalities?
Oh, yeah. Because I don't know them yet. So, like, I feel like I'm making assumptions. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm writing them by making assumptions. And I have to see, like, well, what if I change... Like, what if they had this particular what if they had this terrible piece of backstory? Okay, what if I take out that piece of backstory and insert this piece of backstory? Who do they become? Do they become the truer person in this book? Do you know what I mean? Like,
no, I know. Do you have are there, like, fundamental, like, do they come in, besides a name, do they have, like, a fundamental ethos, like something about them that you're like, this is a codified element, or is it all up for grabs?
Yes, but I don't always know what it is until I start messing with them. And then there's moments where, like, I think, well, I can't do that because if I mess with that piece, then there's nothing that, like, then there's no there. That's the piece. But I don't always know until I start like
This
messing
is
with them.
so fascinating to me. Like, it's giving me mild hives, but I love it because that's the whole point of this series. Because, like, for me, I don't start right. I mean, I'm obviously that highly neurotic author that is like, I must know as much as possible, but I don't start writing a character without knowing three fundamental things about them: what they fear, what they want, and what they're willing to do to get it. Because, like, that builds a mantra for me. Like, Lila Bard, if a thing is worth having, it is worth taking. Like, that is, and so then I know at least I can change a lot about her past. I can change a lot about how she reacts in a situation, but I can't break that unless I'm at the point in the story where I'm going to change her as a person.
And I feel like for me, that stuff becomes solid at the end of the first book.
Yeah.
Like, that's when I have made those decisions. But until then, I think I know, but
Do
I'm
you
willing
know?
to change it if the character isn't working.
Do you know how long the series is going to be? Whether it's going to be one book or or three, or do you know what the scope of it when you first start?
I mean, for the Folk of the Air series, I did. I actually was pretty proud of that because prior to that, when I started Curse Workers, I thought it was one book. And about halfway through, I was like, this is 3 books. I can't do everything I want to do in one book. So I knew halfway through the first book.
That's close.
But I had, the only bad thing is I had sold it. So I had to go back and be like, but I haven't done that many series that weren't co-written.
Yeah, that's true. So did you know, like, with Coldest Girl in Cold Town, were you like, it's going to be it is a single, right? It's a standalone.
Yeah, I knew it was a standalone.
Yeah,
I wanted to do 2 standalones. I had done, at that point, I had done Curse Workers, and I felt like I just want to do some standalones. I, as a kid, really loved standalones.
I love them.
And I love doing them.
Yeah. As an author, it's the most amount of work for the least amount of return because you spend all this time building a world and then you're like, well, goodbye.
It's true, but I also love it. Like, I remember I have a friend of mine who is a doctor who I was sort of like consulting with on the stuff. And, Eric was like, I don't know if this is a sustainable system. And I was like, one and done.
It's hard though. Like, but do you also write short stories?
Sometimes, not as much as I wish I did. They were, for me, the hardest thing to learn how to do. I wrote my first successful short story, and by successful I mean one with a beginning, middle, and end. Like, I don't mean successful.
Fancy short story.
I wrote it after I finished my first novel.
Yeah, I haven't done that many short stories because my agent was like, please stop, because they take me just as long as novels. Like, I write them over months. And like, but I do think the one thing I love about them is they've forced me to be a little bit better at letting go of something that I'm making, rather than saying, like, I'm committing this time to building a world and characters, I must commit to them for however many books.
Right.
You have to be willing to be like, they feel a little bit like the equivalent of those little burning lanterns where you light the lantern and it floats away. And you're like, okay, goodbye, idea. Like, maybe I
feel like they're often like play, though, to me. Like, you can play with something to figure out how you feel about it. Like, I wrote Cold Town as a short story first. And I had been asked to do a vampire short story. And I thought, there's so many vampire books. Yeah. There's so many, like, what do I have to say about this? And as I was sitting down, it really made me remember how much I had loved vampire stuff. Of course, so Kelly Link lives in my town. Like, I see her all the time, or at least I did before we were all
before everything.
And she is not happy when I say that short stories are like an opportunity for me to play. She's like,
I mean, but also I feel like Kelly Link's short stories are like video games. Like, they have so many weird, like, those are, I mean, that's how I was introduced to Kelly Link and to short stories as like an astonishing art form. So anyone watching this, please go read Kelly Link. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I just wrote my very first vampire short story, and I'm working on building it into something a lot bigger now. And I was like, oh my God, I forgot how much I missed vampires, but also I specifically wanted to write a vampire short story that was super gay because I was like, you know what? Like it's like Buffy meets Killing Eve, but it's just like aggressively lesbian. Because I
Mm-hmm.
was like, you know what I miss is like I loved all those shows and all those stories, and like I refuse to believe there's such a thing as a straight vampire. So here we are. Like, doesn't
I mean,
exist.
and then like, yeah, this is a long tradition.
Exactly. Exactly. So like we're running out of time, which I'm devastated by, but I have my favorite question. And I can't wait to ask you because you have enough of a canon. You have enough of a body of work that this should be difficult, but maybe it's
Okay.
not. So I was at a conference, I guess last year, back in the before times, and I was speaking to an author at this conference, or to an actor, and he was kind of we were commiserating over the fact that while he was in a very popular TV show right now, almost all the fans who were there for something he did when he was a teenager. And we were discussing this idea that you never have control as an artist or creator over what you're known for. Like you will never get to pick. If I was ever had to look back at my work, I would never guess that so far Darker Shade of Magic is the most successful. It's just not what I would have guessed. But here we are. So what I want to know is, even though we don't have a say, if you got to choose which of your books would outlive you and it could only be one of them, what would you choose?
Can you choose series?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is really hard.
Right? Like
It's
if
really,
you
really
could
hard.
pick, but only one series could outlive you. And why?
Man, that is really because it's different than outliving you is a different thing.
Yeah.
Outliving you is really different.
Outliving is, do you feel like there's a work that you feel either best represents you or that you are proudest of in its duration or audience, or that you felt like the reason I started asking this question is because when I finished writing Addie, which is my 18th book, I had a moment for about a week where I thought if I never write anything else again for the rest of my life, I'm okay with that.
Wow.
And it only lasted a week. It only lasted a week, and then I was like started freaking out.
But you've
yeah,
been thinking about this book a long time,
not
right?
10 years.
Yeah.
So it left a grave in its
Did
wake.
you
And that's
feel did you feel like when you were doing it,
yeah.
because I assume there's a reason you didn't do it sooner.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't ready.
And like, did you feel like you nailed it when you were doing it, or were you like,
no, I only started writing it because so I had the idea when I was 22. I aggressively knew I wasn't ready craft wise, and I would check in with it every couple of years. And then it got to be I turned 30, and I had told a lot of people about this book, and I started thinking, oh my god, I'm gonna die before I write it. And I became genuinely very neurotic about that. And so I forced and my publisher was like, can you please write that book you've been promising us for 8 years? And so I started it. The entire 2 years I was writing it was hell on earth because I had 7 years of notes from different iterations of myself that I had just dropped into a file. And I genuinely didn't think that I was going to be able to actualize. Like I think about, you have a story idea in your head and it's a beautiful sphere. And writing a first draft is the act of chucking it away from yourself as hard as possible. And then revision is the act of like walking to the lump and shape that's now on the floor. I was miserable the entire writing of it because I felt inadequate to the task. But after it was revised and became done, I genuinely had a moment where I was like, that is the closest thing to the sphere that I had in my head. And I'm never going to write that again. It was just one of those ideas where I knew I could only tell it once. So I didn't want to do it wrong. So that's the book I would choose right now, but only because it has left an open grave in its wake. And I think it's different, but I don't know. Like you've now stalled long enough. Now you have to.
No, okay, so I was gonna say this isn't my pick, but the book that was like that for me was Standalones.
Really?
Which I didn't know how to write.
Yeah.
In part because it was the closest to realistic fiction, and in part because I was thinking of it from the wrong character's point of view. Really? And it was a book that I kept pushing back and pushing back and pushing back. And I remember when I finished it, I gave it to some friends and I said, this was a really great idea. It's too bad I screwed it up. And like, I had that sense of like, I had this perfect idea in my head and all I've done is sort of drag it down. And then, I had to like, fix it and do stuff to it. But But I think that when you have something like that you've been waiting so long, like it
It's
isn't always
hard.
intuitive whether or not you got it.
No, I mean, especially because that first round of revision is usually you have I don't know about you, but I have a very long experience with the first round revision where I spend a lot of time wondering, did I make it better or just different and or worse? Where you're like, have I taken a thing and just like, it was already bad. Did I? And I feel like you said this at some point, like you can't make it worse. Like,
Yeah, I feel like it's like cleaning the toilet. You're not gonna no matter what you do.
I love it. So wait, so do you stay with doll bones or do you
No,
have
that's not. So I'm gonna cheat. So there's three different things that
okay.
I think about. And I'm not sure. For me, the first book that I felt that way about was Valiant. And
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, that was my favorite. And the book that I felt like I had done something really different and I had said something I wanted to say with it.
Yeah.
Um, and then Curse Workers for me, that magic system and like that world
Yeah.
like is so much fun. It is.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I would write in that world forever. It was the time when I was like, I'm ready to be a dolphin. Like
Yeah.
I'm.
You're like, I will be a dolphin for you.
Yeah.
You can be a dolphin, Holly. You can go back.
it was not the right time for that project. Yeah. Let's just say that. And maybe I will someday, or maybe I will figure out how to get some of the energy that I loved about that.
Yeah.
But I learned so much from those books. Everything I have written after Curse Workers was informed by how much I taught myself about cons, about heists, about noir, about like plotting,
like
that
it
kind of
has everything.
Turn and twist. Like I became a different writer because of those books.
Yeah.
And then I think The Folk of the Air, for me, this is the most I've ever known about a series before I wrote it.
So you mean you didn't just have the moment and the feeling?
I had more.
I'm gonna like have nightmares, Holly, about just the idea of only having like a snapshot.
Well, now I'm back to it. That's what I've been working on in the new project.
I was gonna say, as we end, the thing that everybody wants to know, can you say anything about what's next, or is it just all lockdown?
Well, there's a couple things that I have that I can't talk about. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing this illustrated card novella, which is really fun. It was really fun to do. And then I'm trying to write an adult book. And I wrote about like maybe 30 first chapters, all different from one another. It was a bizarre nightmare, but I feel I've actually written like the first 25% of it seems to be a book.
You have my email address, Holly.
You want to tell me what's wrong with this thing? I will be happy to hear your thoughts.
Can't wait. I can't
wait. People are starting to people. And some people like.
Yeah.
And
that's like how you know you've hit like the 30%. When you're like, oh, is that who you are?
Yeah. So it's finally sort of starting to come together. And but Indeed was like one of those things where I was like, it has got this feeling. Mm-hmm. And the people I was trying to talk to about it were like,
I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm so excited. And I'm so excited about things that you can't talk about. Those are the best things. Those are the most wonderful things. Holly, I just want you to know you are one of my favorite authors. Aww. I think you are just absolutely extraordinary. I can't thank you enough for chatting with me about this. I have learned so much. I have been horrified, but again, the name of this series is No Right Way. There is no right way to write. And it's about, what works for you. And clearly it works because you are incredible.
Well, I adore you. I adore your work. I'm looking forward to Addie LaRue, and I'm very grateful for you having me on today.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. For everyone watching, this will live on my Instagram page, on Instagram Live, or on IGTV, whatever it's called now, and over on YouTube. We are now immortalized in our interview form. But thank you so much, Holly.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.